someone were to ask you to name the greatest kings of India or Bharat, you probably think of Akbar the Great or Ashoka the Great. Some of you may even think of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Let me tell you about one of the greatest kings who preceded all of these gentlemen. In the 8th century or around 700 CE, Kashmir was ruled by the Karkota dynasty. The king was a gentleman called Durlabhavardhan. Now Durlabhavardhan had 3 sons, the youngest of who was called Lalitaditya. Lalitaditya obviously had no scope of becoming king because he had 2 elder brothers, but fate had something else in mind. By the time he turned 25, both of his elder brothers had passed away. The eldest one died in a battle, and the next one, who was Tarapida, was not really liked by the people because he was more interested in having a good time than actually ruling. Unfortunately for him, Tarapida died of a mysterious illness, and in the year 724 CE, Lalitaditya found himself on the throne of the Karkota dynasty in Kashmir. At the age of 25, when he came or ascended the throne, the world as we knew it was in a very interesting state of flux. Towards his northeast was Tibet, and right next to that was China, and towards the northwest was the kingdom of Tokharistan, or what is today known as Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and the other regions, and right above him was Baltistan. Below Kashmir obviously was modern day Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and other regions, which was ruled by the king of Kannauj known as Yashovarman. Yashovarman was a very powerful king ruling over central India. Kashmir itself was a very powerful kingdom under the Karkota dynasty. As a matter of fact, there were constant conflicts between Tibet and China, and the Kashmiri king at that time, which is Lalitaditya's brother, had helped the Chinese against the Tibetan forces, and the Chinese courts had even sent a letter thanking Kashmir for their help at that point in time. China, however, in that period was going through a very, very difficult phase. It was ruled by the Tang dynasty, and the Emperor Huansang was besieged with infighting. His nobles were warring against each other. There was a risk of civil war breaking out, and all of his energies were focused only and exclusively on trying to manage his kingdom. Tibet, however, was a very powerful military kingdom. It's not the Tibet as we know it today, which is a peace-loving Buddhist kingdom that's been taken over by China, but it was a very strong, militarily powerful kingdom that had aspirations of ruling and controlling all the territories surrounding it. So on the one front, Tibet was repeatedly attacking China. On the other front, they would attack Gilgit and Baltistan, and through the northeastern territories of India, they were also interested in taking over central India. That's how powerful Tibet was. On the western front, the Arab forces would routinely attack what in those days was the Rajput kingdoms of Kabulistan and Zabulistan. What we today know as Kabul, and which is part of Afghanistan, in those days was a Rajput kingdom. So this was the scenario. In this scenario, what mattered to Lalitaditya was the fact that China's trade routes passed through his kingdom, through Kabulistan, Zabulistan, Tokharistan, and into the Western world, which means that he could benefit tremendously from the Chinese trade passing through his kingdom. And Kashmir and China had very strong economic and trade ties. With the Arabs attacking the trade routes on the western front and Tibet attacking the trade routes on the eastern front, he knew that if he was to survive, he had to help China free the trade routes. China themselves were not in a powerful enough condition or position to free the trade routes. In fact, they were so weak that rather than trying to fight Tibet, Chinese court documents have proven that Jin Cheng, one of the Chinese princes, was married to the Tibetan king. That's another story, that she was so sick of this royal alliance that in 723 she managed to escape from Tibet and came to Kashmir and took refuge over there because she couldn't go back to China. So in this backdrop, Lalitaditya ascended the throne. He took the title of Muktapida and took over the title of Emperor Lalitaditya Muktapida. The first thing he did was to form an alliance with Yashovarman of Kannauj. This alliance functioned such that Lalitaditya attacked the Tibetan forces from the northeastern side, whereas Yashovarman attacked them from central India to ensure that these guys were beaten back and they could not control either Bharat or the trade routes coming from China going through Indian controlled territories. Lalitaditya wrote to the Chinese to form an alliance, but unfortunately they were in no position to do so. So single-handedly he took over the Tibetan forces and by 733 completely decimated them. He freed up all the Chinese trade routes which were going through Tibetan territory to Gilgit-Baltistan, through Kashmir and onto the Western world. He also set up forward posts to ensure that the Tibetans could never come back there. He then sent a letter to the Tang dynasty's court saying that I have freed the trade routes and you can now trade freely through my territory, obviously paying me whatever tribute you need to pay. But to ensure the Tibetans never come back, I will also give you a place where your army can come and camp next to the Mahapadmanand Lake, which is today known as the Vular Lake in Kashmir. And he said that I will indefinitely feed up to 200,000 or 2 lakh Chinese soldiers who can be camped there to ensure that Tibet never again takes over your trade routes. Unfortunately, China was so weak at that time that they could not spare even 20,000 troops, let alone 2 lakh troops, to come and guard their own trade routes. What this really signifies is that Lalitaditya Muktapida was so powerful that he could actually host 200,000 foreign troops indefinitely in his territory and had no fear that they could turn over and attack him in turn. So that's the story of Lalitaditya Muktapida from 724 to 733, where he completely decimated the powerful Tibetan forces and helped free up the trade routes from China. Of course, there are a lot of historians who have got a leftist or a communist bent of mind who misinterpret these overtures that Lalitaditya made to the Chinese court by saying that he was a vassal of the Chinese king. A vassal would typically mean a subordinate king. There is nothing further away from the truth. Right from the time of Durlabhavardhan, the Karkota dynasty was fiercely independent and one of the most powerful kingdoms. In fact, there are some misinterpretations say that Harshavardhan was actually ruling over China and over Kashmir, and Durlabhavardhan was a subordinate king to him, which is not true. They were a fiercely independent kingdom. They were friendly ties with China because of the strong economic relationship that they had with each other. None of them was subordinate to the other one. Neither was China subordinate to Kashmir, and nor was Karkota or Kashmir subordinate to China at any point in time. In the next segment, we'll look at how Lalitaditya Muktapida freed up the western front for the trade routes to be opened and for him to prosper economically. We've seen how Lalitaditya Muktapida demolished the Tibetan forces and the threat that they posed to the northeastern trade routes. What about the northwestern trade routes and the other parts that were under his control? I'll take a step back and let's talk a little about what kind of a king or what kind of an emperor Lalitaditya Muktapida was. Records show that he was a very shrewd and very able administrator and king. He knew that if he had to secure his kingdom, he would have to be on war campaigns for extensive periods of time. So the first thing that he did was to build a very strong administrative system in his empire. Even if he was away from the capital or away from his kingdom, the ruling and the administration of the kingdom would run very, very smoothly. He had structured it such that no matter what, every individual would get justice and would get their just dues, irrespective of whether the king was there in the kingdom or not. That's the first thing he did. The second thing he did, he realized that the Arabs were fighting a war where if they would win, they would forcibly convert everyone to Islam. So it was not just a war for territory or a war for money or a war for wealth. It was a war for taking over the very culture and social fabric of a place. And this had to be halted. So even though the Karkota kingdom or the Karkota dynasty or Kashmir had no friendly ties with Kannauj, they were not particularly friendly with each other, he still reached out to Yashovarman and said that we both have common enemies to fight. So it makes eminent sense for us to form an alliance to ensure that in our infighting, outsiders don't come and capture us. Imagine way back in the day, that's the kind of foresight that he had and the kind of forward thinking that he had. So he formed alliances with kingdoms that had similar thought processes. Whether they were allies or not, it didn't matter. Whether they were friends or not, it didn't matter. They had a common cause. He brought them all together for this common cause so they could repel their common enemies. You would imagine that he first fought the Tibetans and then Lalit Aditya took on the Arabs. Well, actually it was very different. He simultaneously fought on both the fronts. From 724 to 733 AD, which is a period of 9 to 10 years, Lalit Aditya Muktapida simultaneously fought the Tibetan forces on the northeastern front and the Arab forces in the northwestern front. As I mentioned in the previous video, the northwestern front had three main kingdoms other than Sindh, which was controlled by the Arabs. There was Tokharistan, which was also controlled by the Arabs, and then there was Kabulistan and Zabulistan, which were ruled by two Rajput Buddhist rulers. Now, both of these gentlemen were of Turkish descent, but they were practicing Buddhists, and to that extent they were tolerant of every other religion. They were under threat from the Caliph of Turkey or from Arabistan, because the Caliph sent out letters through his governor, which was Junaid, that time posted at Sindh, to Kabulistan, Zabulistan and to Kashmir, saying that either embrace Islam or we will come and completely destroy your kingdom. Obviously, when Lalit Aditya received this letter, the first thing he did was he took his forces and attacked Junaid. His army and Junaid's forces met in the plains of Punjab, where a tremendous battle took place, and Lalit Aditya completely destroyed and drove Junaid out from there. Junaid retreated, came back towards central India and western India, tried to win some battles, regroup, rebuild his army and his wealth so that he could attack Lalit Aditya again, which of course he did, but he was again defeated. After his second defeat, he was so scattered, his forces were so scattered that he had no choice but to retreat back to Arabia. On his way back, he met with his death, and the Caliph then appointed Tamim as the governor. Tamim met the same fate as Junaid did, because by this time, Lalit Aditya formed an alliance with Kabulistan and the Zabulistan Shahis, and these forces together completely decimated the Arab forces to such an extent that they had to abandon Tokharistan, which is parts of modern Tajikistan and Afghanistan. And the Kashmiri Empire or the Karakota dynasty extended all the way to Tokharistan. Other than the coastal area near Sindh and a few scattered places, Arab rule was completely taken out from this region. One tactic that Lalit Aditya employed was, when he first defeated Junaid, which was in around 724 CE, he sent out letters to all the vassal kings of Arabs who were under the thumb of Junaid, saying that I have defeated Junaid. This is your opportunity now to revolt against him. Stop paying him a tribute. Let him not get rich on your money and your wealth, and we can together fight him out. This tactic paid off very, very well for him, because a lot of subordinate kings who were Hindu kings stopped paying a tribute to Junaid. So what Lalit Aditya did was militarily defeated them and economically completely hamstrung them. Left with no choice, the Arabs repeatedly attacked with more and more force, but the alliance that Lalit Aditya forged was so strong that they could not defeat them. It was like a barrier that they would crash and get destroyed against. Finally, the Caliph sent Al-Hakam in 730 CE as the governor of Tokharistan, and it was a governorship only in name, because he wasn't controlling Tokharistan. He just sent him with a large army and said, you are the governor of Tokharistan, drive out the Karakota forces and control that area. Ultimately, by 733 CE, Lalit Aditya had completely destroyed Al-Hakam also, and the region was freed of Arab forces for a long time to come. Of course, none of the Arab chronicles or records have any mention of this, but that is very typical. If you see the Al-Minas or any other record that they have, they don't talk about their defeats. They talk about their victories, and if they've been defeated, they say we fought valiantly and we killed a lot of enemy soldiers, but they'll never say we got defeated or we were completely routed, which is the same of Arab records of that time also. Thankfully, we have records like the Rashtarangini and other sources which tell us of the great exploits of Maharaja or Samrat Lalit Aditya Muktapida. This gave him so much wealth that he actually deployed it for enhancing and building his empire into a more formidable place. One of the first things he did was to build Parihaspur, which ended up being his capital city, the ruins of which can even be seen just 20 kilometers outside Kashmir even today. and of course the famous Martand Sun Temple, of which we'll talk more in the next video. We've spoken about how Lalitaditya was a formidable warrior who completely checkmated the Tibetan forces on his northeastern border and the Arab forces on the northwestern border. But is that what made him one of the greatest empires the world has seen, or one of the greatest emperors the world has seen? No. One of the greatest things that he accomplished was building an empire. All of these military campaigns meant that Lalitaditya Muktapida carried back tremendous amounts of wealth. He did not use these to simply enrich himself, but he spent all this money in building one of the greatest empires of that era. Like we mentioned, he built Parihaspur, a new capital which had some magnificent buildings, not just with Hindu temples but also with Buddhist viharas, because a lot of people in his empire were Buddhists at that time. In fact, one of his key generals, Chankuna, was of Turkish descent, probably a resident of Tukharistan, and when he ended up capturing it, he was so impressed with Chankuna's skill that he enrolled his services into his own army. Chankuna was apparently a practicing Buddhist, and he built many Buddhist viharas or Buddhist temples within the Kashmir Empire that Lalitaditya funded for him to build. One of the greatest structures that he built was the Martand Sun Temple. This was almost 250 square feet by 250 feet by about 150 feet in size. 84 pillars, exactly identical in size, shape, carving and structure, that helped build this temple. It is truly one of the most magnificent examples of Indian architecture. What makes it special is that the design had influences of Greek architecture, the architecture of Tukharistan, and obviously Kashmiri architecture. There were intricate carvings in the stone, and it sported idols of Surya Dev and of course Lord Shiva amongst other deities. In fact, the temple was so strong and powerful that it stood the test of time for almost 600 plus years, till Sikandar Shah Miri, who was then the ruler of Kashmir in about 1500 CE, got it into his head that he has to destroy all Hindu temples, all Hindu structures, and convert everyone to Islam in the areas that he ruled. He was so ruthless, in fact, that he was given the title of Butch Khan. That means somebody who is the destroyer of idols. So while he destroyed a lot of temples, he also attempted to destroy the Martand Sun Temple, which is rather unfortunate because it was a beautiful example of architecture. It is said that the temple was so strong that Butch Khan Miri could not destroy it. Eventually, he filled up the temple, the entire temple structure with timber, set it to fire so that the stone would crumble. Even then, he could not completely destroy the Martand Sun Temple, and it got partially destroyed. The rest of the structure crumbled over the next 200 to 300 years because of earthquakes and other natural calamities. Such was the building works that were undertaken by Lalitaditya Muktapida. Simultaneously, after these campaigns with the Tibetans and the Arabs were over, there was a conflict between him and Yashovarman. Now you have to remember that Yashovarman was the most powerful king or emperor of central Bharat at that time. There was possibly some disagreement between him and Lalitaditya about the distribution of territories that they'd won, which meant that both these powerful forces faced off against each other. A tremendous battle took place. It was not a one-sided fight, but something that lasted over several days and weeks before eventually Lalitaditya Muktapida defeated Yashovarman and made him also a vassal king under him. Post this, he undertook the Ashwamedha Yagna, where he and his army and his forces travelled to far-off spots of what constituted Bharat at that time. And it is said that at its peak, the Karakota dynasty under Lalitaditya Muktapida extended all the way from present-day Afghanistan and Sindh in the northwest area to the Bay of Bengal and present-day Madhya Pradesh. Imagine, nearly 1500 or 2000 years back, there was an emperor whose empire was the largest in the world at that time, other than the Chinese empire because of the sheer size of China as a territory. And he managed to accomplish all this within his lifetime. Undertook great building works, had a very strong administrative system. In fact, there is one anecdote about his administration where he said that no noble in his kingdom could stockpile or keep a stock of grains for more than 1 year. What this ensured was that there was no hoarding taking place. What this ensured was that the nobles who could afford to buy grain or could have a lot of grain stockpiled for many years and then sell it at a higher price did not take place. They could only store enough grain to feed themselves for a year, and the rest of it had to be sold in the open market, so the ordinary people would never fall short of it. It was these and many such policies that endeared Lalitaditya Muktapida to every single citizen within his empire. He made such a formidable kingdom that even after his death, it survived for almost 100 years before weak successors frittered away all the gains that he had got, and the Utpala dynasty finally took over from the Karkota dynasty in 855 CE. So that's the tale of Lalitaditya Muktapida, who in my opinion is one of the greatest emperors that our land has seen in thousands of years.